A rabbi listens to Jesus. Rabbi Jacob Neusner reacts to his words and deeds. So just a disclaimer, I actually wrote most of this on February 20th, 2021, so 5 years and 1 month ago. I have since added a short piece to the end, so I'll read the whole thing, and for the first part, I'll read as though I had just written it 5 years ago, my younger self. A rabbi listens to Jesus. Rabbi Jacob Neusner reacts to his words and deeds. I am writing these words on February 20th, 2021. Lent began last Wednesday, and I took the opportunity to begin reading Pope Benedict XVI's 2007 analysis of Jesus, his life, mission, and importance, Jesus of Nazareth, published in 3 volumes between 2007 and 2012. I was reading the first volume published in 2007, which is actually the only one I own. As I was reading, I was struck by an especially interesting section in its 4th chapter. There, the Pope spends a large part of this discussion reflecting on a book by Rabbi Jacob Neusner, Rabbi Talks with Jesus, published in 1993, in which the author imagines himself to be a rabbi overhearing Jesus' words in first-century Galilee. So I've said many times how reading is time travel, and ancient documents like the Gospels have the power to transport us back in time in our imaginations as we read them. That's exactly what Rabbi Neusner does. He time travels by reading the Gospels and putting himself in the shoes of a rabbi living back then. Writing as a faithful Jew who does not believe Jesus to have been the Messiah or the Son of God, Rabbi Neusner makes his own honest attempt to re-experience the dismay the people of that time might have felt at Jesus' actions and words regarding the Sabbath and its observance, and the commandment to honor one's father and mother. And before we do that, here's a photo of Pope Benedict XVI and Rabbi Jacob Neusner. They were actually very good friends, and I'll mention that again in just a moment. It will also be noted that Rabbi Neusner, who passed away in 2016, was indeed a practicing Jew, though he was very familiar with Christian beliefs and theology. In fact, as I just said, he and Pope Benedict were good friends. The book being discussed here is largely Rabbi Neusner's own explanation for rejecting Christianity and remaining true to his own ancestral faith. The book is all about why he is decidedly a Jew and not a Christian. For this reason, it provides a useful perspective on who Jesus was seen to be and how his words were understood when they were first spoken 2,000 years ago. In addition, Pope Benedict referred to Rabbi Neusner's book as by far the most important book for the Jewish-Christian dialogue in the past decade. That's from a remark on the back cover, and I'm going to emphasize the word not. Why Rabbi Neusner is decidedly a Jew and not a Christian. Rabbi Neusner's comments focus on 2 incidents drawn from the life of Jesus. One of them is a scene found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Jesus and the apostles are eating corn. Some translations say corn, but it would not have been corn, because corn was unknown in the ancient world until after Christopher Columbus, so it was wheat. I believe that the Old English word corn actually referred to like all grains, and then somehow the word came to mean a grain that no one actually knew about until later on. Anyway, we're going to say wheat, and this is actually a very small detail to get hung up on, so apologies for that. Let me just start over. One of the comments is focused on a scene found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Jesus and the apostles are eating wheat on the Sabbath, and Jesus states, when criticized for working on the day of rest, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So Jesus and his apostles are picking food and eating it, and that is something that Jews should not be doing on the Sabbath, right? Because picking food is working, right? And you shouldn't work on the Sabbath. The second is the episode, also found in the first 3 Gospels, where Jesus is called forth to see his mother and brothers, and he refuses to go, instead staying with those who are listening to him. And he says, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Both of these incidents make an impression on Rabbi Neusner, for they not only violate custom, but defy God's commandments, while Jesus speaks of himself as though he has the authority to do these things. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Pope Benedict notes, along with Rabbi Neusner, that the observance of the Sabbath and the honoring of one's parents are essential parts of Jewish life, one done in imitation of God, resting on the seventh day, and the other commanded by God, the fourth of the Ten Commandments. Together, they form a bond which unites the Jewish community and has helped keep them faithful as a community to the God of their ancestors. The loyalty of the family and one's ties to it can both be traced to these activities, the family time spent together on the Sabbath, and so keeping fast to them is of extreme importance to observant Jews, Rabbi Neusner included. And it just popped into my mind right now. I don't know, those of you who are taking this class, maybe some of you are watching this video and you're not a part of my comparative religion class, but we are reading as kind of as a semester-long assignment the Dalai Lama's book, Towards a True Kinship of Faiths, which describes the Dalai Lama's meetings with and impressions of people and beliefs, different beliefs, right, besides his own Buddhism. So he devotes a chapter to his time spent in the company of different religious people, Hindus, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and just sort of describes what his takeaway from each religion, right? Not being a member of that particular religion. And in the chapter on Judaism, there is a really interesting little moment here where he discusses with a rabbi the secret, right, for staying true to their identity living in exile. The Dalai Lama lives in exile in India after the Chinese invaded Tibet back in the 1950s. And of course, Jewish people have been living in exile many times over the centuries, when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, then again later on when the Romans conquered Jerusalem and destroyed it and sent the Jewish people scattered right throughout the far corners of the empire. Anyway, I'm just going to read this short little excerpt from the Dalai Lama's book from chapter 5, Judaism, Faith of the Exile. The Dalai Lama says, "When I first visited Israel in 1994, I met with one of the two chief rabbis of Judaism in Jerusalem. During this meeting, I asked the rabbi what it is that unites Jews the world over, what the kernel of the doctrine is that unites all Jews. His response took me by surprise. When it comes to doctrine, there is hardly any uniformity. What unites all faithful Jews are the rituals. Come Friday, all Jewish homes from Siberia to Ethiopia hold Sabbath in the same manner. We have been doing this for thousands of years, since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem." All right, so that just goes to show you how important keeping holy the Sabbath is. And here is Jesus not doing that, right? Okay, sorry, that digression that popped into my mind, and the book was right next to me on the table, so I wanted to pick that up and read it to you. Anyway, let's get back on track. Rabbi Neusner says, "So to keep the Sabbath, one remains at home. It is not enough merely not to work. One also has to rest. And resting means reforming one day a week the circle of the family and the household, everyone at home and in place. Therefore, observing the Sabbath is more than just resting for oneself, a day off. It is a fundamental part of the Jewish social order, within which family ties are rooted, and God's activity is actualized in human imitation. Human beings do as God does on the seventh day, that is, they rest. Yet how shocking this must have been to Jesus' Jewish listeners. Jesus calls himself the Lord of the Sabbath in a passage related in all three synoptic Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The scandalized Pharisees see Jesus and his followers working on the Sabbath, picking and eating grain in the field. Jesus responds with his famous words, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Rabbi Neusner imagines Jesus' words as coming not from some reforming rabbi seeking a more liberal approach to the law observed by the Jews of that time, but as someone far more radical. For Jesus makes a claim to authority that goes far beyond that of any mere teacher. He does not just interpret the Torah, but he makes a far stronger and more shocking claim. Rabbi Neusner imagines asking his followers, "Is it really so that your master, the Son of Man, is Lord of the Sabbath? I ask again, is your master God?" Rabbi Neusner sees Jesus' actions and claim to be dangerous, especially in the minds of the first people who heard him speak, in the incident recorded by the gospel writers. Jesus' claim to be Lord of the Sabbath is the first of a series of cracks in the Jewish social order, fracturing the fleshly connection, the family, the rationale for Israel's social existence. The next crack will extend further, reaching for the family itself. Also related in the three synoptic gospels, we see the story which Rabbi Neusner also references as he continues to explain the scandal and the fractures Jesus brought to the Jewish community of first century Palestine. The moment when he teaches that his own mother and brothers are not his family, but instead those who do the will of God are his family. And I'm going to add that right now. Those who do the will of God are his family. St. Luke's version is the shortest, so I'm going to read that one. Now Jesus' mother and brothers came to see him, but they were not able to get near him because of the crowd. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside waiting to see you." He replied, "My mother and brothers are those who hear God's word and put it into practice." As he imagines overhearing Jesus' words, we're talking about Rabbi Neusner. As Rabbi Neusner imagines overhearing Jesus' words, placing himself among the crowd gathered there, Rabbi Neusner asks himself, does Jesus not teach me to violate one of the two great commandments of the 10 Commandments that concern the social order? Is he enticing us to disobedience against God's commandment? Jesus' preaching, Rabbi Neusner is forced to conclude, is no basis in which to form a stable society. It breaks it apart, putting a single individual, Jesus himself, at its focus. Reflecting on what Rabbi Neusner has said about Jesus and the crumbling of Jewish society that will follow from his radical thoughts and actions, Pope Benedict XVI wonders, what has this Messiah, Jesus, actually brought? What did Jesus actually bring, if not world peace, universal prosperity, and a better world? What has he brought? And it is at this point that Rabbi Neusner and Pope Benedict part ways. For while Rabbi Neusner sees Jesus as the bringer of chaos and the disruption of Jewish life, Benedict sees him as the bringer of something else, God. He says, he has brought God, and now we know his face. Now we can call upon him. Now we know the path that we human beings have to take in this world. Jesus has brought God, and with God the truth about our origin and destiny, faith, hope, and love. It is only because of our hardness of heart that we think this is too little. Supplement, March 4th, 2026, 5 years later. 5 years later, it is actually Lent again, and I want to add a short thought to the above discussion regarding the question of Jesus' identity. Since the middle of the last century, many Christians have turned to the great Irish intellectual C.S. Lewis for answers, and one of his most famous works of Christian apologetics, Mere Christianity. Specifically, it is in this book that the former atheist presents an argument known as the trilemma, also known as the Lord, liar, or lunatic argument. Here is the version Lewis puts forward. I am trying to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him being Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. We are faced then with a frightening alternative. This man we are talking about either was and is just what he said, or else a lunatic, or something worse. I have to accept the view that he was and is God. We can consider Lewis's words and the possibility and one more time. We can consider Lewis's words and the three possible ways of regarding Jesus, which he mentions, with what Pope Benedict and Rabbi Neusner have to say about Jesus, and how they agree or disagree with each other with regard to Jesus. First, Pope Benedict and Rabbi Neusner agree that the core of Jesus' teaching, particularly the Sermon on the Mount, was his claim to be divine and to have authority over the Jewish law, something no one had besides God himself. Right? So Jesus claimed to have authority over the law. Only God has authority over the law, but Jesus says he does too. They agree that Jesus places himself above the law handed down by Moses. See Jesus' claim to be the Lord of the Sabbath. This signifies his claim, I have to get rid of that. See Jesus' claim to be the Lord of the Sabbath, which signifies him as the Lord of the Sabbath. So one more time. They agree that Jesus places himself above the law handed down by Moses. See Jesus' claim to be Lord of the Sabbath, which signifies him as Lord of the Sabbath. Apologies for that mistake. Second, we must consider where and how Pope Benedict and Rabbi Neusner disagree. I'm going to emphasize the word disagree. Pope Benedict, being a Christian, obviously believes Jesus was who he said he was, that he was indeed Lord, taking the first of the three possibilities Lewis gave us in his trilemma. But what about Rabbi Neusner? Who or what does he think Jesus was? Thank you very much.